MCAS stands for mast cell activation syndrome. A syndrome is the term used in medicine to describe a sort of unusual constellation of symptoms. The mast cell, which is part of our immune system, is equivalent to a landmine. It's in all of our body tissues, and it goes off and releases chemicals that create all sorts of unusual symptoms. In someone with MCAS, that same mast cell has become inappropriately sensitive. It starts to go off when it shouldn't for all sorts of weird and wonderful reasons, and it starts to create a whole range of highly unusual symptoms. Hence, overactive mast cells create a syndrome of symptoms, hence the term mast cell activation syndrome. It's a very disheartening process, and when you've got a disease that affects lots of different body systems, as a patient it is simply incomprehensible, because you can see that they're all looking at the individual bits, and at risk of stating the obvious, no one's looking at it in a joined up way. Once you've seen lots of doctors and they've been unable to find anything, you then fall into the category of medically unexplained symptoms, which is really shorthand for it's all in your head, or almost synonymous with that. And indeed, my company doctor suggested I see a psychiatrist. In the later stages of my symptoms, when I really was very ill and indeed losing my mind because I was told that there was nothing wrong with me in effect, I was diagnosed with a condition called a somatization disorder, which is a mental health illness. I was very lucky. I found a doctor who was interested in everything. He wanted to look at me as a whole, and he sat in the middle of a process where he referred me out to other doctors and took me through a structured process, and in a few months probably worked out what it would have taken the normal system a decade to work through. That realisation that there is simply something going wrong, but they might not understand it, but are keen to find out, that is the single most rewarding feeling that a patient can have that has spent. And I was lucky, I didn't spend that. I mean, people spend decades going around and round in circles experiencing this. So when I had a doctor that sort of interacted with me and gave me that feeling, I knew that if a doctor listened to my symptoms and took it seriously, that they would quickly find out what was wrong with me. The symptoms were simply so unusual that I couldn't believe that this would not make sense and be quite obvious to somebody somewhere. And they were. He worked it out pretty quickly, in a couple of months of quality thinking and listening to me. More than anything, being believed, being told that there is something really wrong with you, that's the most important thing. Somebody that actually you engage with, that you feel like is going to take it seriously, the investigation of you. He took me through a process and diagnosed me with something called mast cell activation syndrome. I'd never heard of a mast cell before. I thought, gosh, this is unusual. Is it rare? Is it complicated, etc.? And then I discovered that after the doctor diagnosed me and said he would read all the literature on the condition, and there was a lot of literature on the condition. Unfortunately, almost all of it by overseas doctors. There are clinics in Germany and America and Austria and Spain, but very little in the UK in terms of any specialism that focuses on this condition. I mean, indeed, the doctor that diagnosed me tried to find help, and he could find no help on the NHS. Now I'm frustrated because I have a diagnosis, I have some form of treatment, but I know it's not optimal, and it's very frustrating because I can't help thinking that if I could find somebody that perhaps would engage and was more interested and had the time, that I might actually get better treatment and improve even more. There was a complete vacuum of support, both in the medical system and in terms of the patient support system. And looking at other conditions and realising the power of and the need for patient groups to actually form and act as a focal point for both supporting patients and doctors and trying to lobby for advancement, a group of us set up a charity, really, Mast Cell Action, to try and fill this vacuum, particularly and primarily initially in support. The group grew very quickly. and discovered there was hundreds and hundreds of people with kind of similar experiences to me, people that had been perhaps told by a doctor that they suspected it was a mast cell problem but didn't have a formal diagnosis, people being told that they had unstable mast cells, or words that really amounted to a description of the condition, which was called mast cell activation syndrome. Many of them without a diagnosis, an enormous number of them being seen in the private sector, some travelling to America. The group that we're in has just mushroomed, and there's well over 1,500 people in one of the online Facebook groups, and then there's another couple of groups with many more hundreds of people in as well. UK patients. As a doctor will tell you, at the moment this condition has no home on the NHS. It's got no centre, no focal point. And there's lots of doctors with varying views on the condition, whether it exists or not, and if it exists, what's it look like. And the tests aren't by any means 100% accurate. It's a sort of clinical presentation, tests and response to medication are the three aspects of the diagnosis. So it's controversial. More than anything, and it would be of enormous benefit to the NHS if this happened, if there was a centre created with some senior doctors that could that have read the literature, started to take the histories of the patients and start to build up a cohort and a centre of excellence around this condition. There's lots of large private clinics on this condition, but unfortunately that doesn't really advance things in the world of UK medicine. It needs a senior NHS champion that is prepared to roll out their sleeves and get to grips with it, really.